Hey guys, Jeremy here with Something Simple. Thanks for joining today. I'm going to spend the next several videos focusing on breakfast items. So the last video I made an Ethiopian dish called injera fit, and today I'm going to make a Mexican dish called rajas poblano. And that involves making a breakfast that consists of sauteed onions and poblano peppers. And also today I have a special treat. I'm going to be making homemade tortillas from corn. But before I get started, I wanted to just give a little background on why corn is so important to many Latin cultures. And one of the ingredients that I'm using today is masa, and this is what we're going to be using to make the corn tortillas. And I'm kind of a food nerd, so I like to give a little history about certain foods that many of us may not be aware of. So corn obviously was domesticated in Mesoamerica thousands of years ago, but one of the complexities of corn involves a process called nixtamalization, and many of us may not be aware of how corn flour is made when it's used to make tortillas and tamales and things like that. So just to give a little background about nixtamalization, when you hear that term, it's a process that it refers to a process for the preparation of corn in which the corn is soaked in an alkaline solution. So the importance of that is the alkaline solution, one, it removes toxins that might be in the corn from mycotoxin contaminated corn. The process has been used in Mesoamerica for thousands of years, and I believe the first documented use of the process was about 1500 BCE. The process of nixtamalization not only improved the taste and texture of corn, but it also made the corn more nutritious, because if you just eat plain corn by itself and you rely on corn as a major food source, it actually is not very nutritious. Your body can't absorb the niacin, which is one of the important B vitamins found in corn. So when the nixtamalization process occurs, it actually makes the niacin more bioavailable, so your body can actually absorb those nutrients. Unfortunately, after corn was brought back from the New World, it was planted in Spain, and from there it spread to other countries. And a lot of countries have come to rely on corn because it's easy to grow, it doesn't require a lot of water, and usually the yields are pretty high. So countries like India, China, Africa, some of those countries have become reliant on corn as a major food source. But unfortunately, when they consume large amounts of corn or rely on it as a major food source, it actually can lead to some vitamin deficiency or a disease called pellagra. And this is basically your body can't absorb the nutrients from the corn, so you're just basically eating something that's not nutritious, or your body can't absorb the nutrients and the vitamins from that food. Anyway, diseases aside, just another side note, the Mesoamerican diet really lacked major protein sources, kind of like we have today in our Western diet. But thanks to the consumption of processed corn, beans, and squash, the Mesoamerican diet actually contained complete amino acids. So in essence, the Mesoamerican diet could potentially have been vegetarian, but they did supplement their diet with other protein, animal-based protein sources, but I won't go into that. So another thing, if you have any Latino friends or family members, you can ask them about las tres hermanas, or three sisters in English. And this is a tradition, I think, that goes back many generations, where when families grow their garden, they usually plant corn, beans, and squash together. And so this is a process, or a practice, I should say, that's been very important for many generations, just because of the benefits that the combination of those three foods will provide. So, all right, let's go ahead and get started, and I'm going to start cutting up some of the peppers, and we will then move on to making the tortillas. All right, so I have my poblano pepper, and in case you aren't aware of the heat that the poblano pepper contains, typically these are what you would consider a mild heat. One word of caution though, you might occasionally get one that's actually a little on the spicier side. So if you're feeding this to your family and you may have people in your family who are sensitive to spicy food, I would probably just taste a little bit of the pepper and just to make sure that it's not too spicy. But again, most of these should be mild. So I'm going to start by slicing my pepper in half lengthwise. And I do this because I just like to pull out the stem like so. And then I take out all the seeds. And then I'm going to slice my peppers, once I get the seed out, into strips, like so. Try to cut your fingers off. Alright, so I've sliced my poblano peppers into thin strips, and now I'm going to slice some of my onion. So depending on how many people you're cooking for, I actually have another poblano pepper that I've already sliced. So I have 2 poblano peppers, and then probably about half of a whole onion, half of a large onion would be sufficient. This is actually one I used yesterday, so I'm just going to go ahead and use part of this as well. I'm only making this for a couple people. I'll have some left over. So this is great. If this is something that you actually want to make ahead, like the night before, just throw it in a container, and then the next morning just heat it up, have some tortillas, and you have a quick breakfast. Alright, so let's go ahead and cut this into some longer strips as well. Okay, so I have some onions and my poblano peppers. The other thing is I actually did preheat my skillet to medium heat, and I'm going to put some avocado oil in it just so the stuff doesn't really stick. And I'm going to actually start off by cooking the peppers first, because I do want these to kind of get, I don't want to say blackened, but just lightly toasted. And then we're going to cook the onions as well, so these are basically caramelized. Okay, so I have my skillet heated on medium heat, and now I'm going to add some avocado oil. Just enough to coat the pan. Don't have to put a whole bunch. We're not deep fat frying these. And I say that because poblano peppers are, for those of you who don't know, the poblano pepper is the type of pepper that's used to making chile rellenos. Also, the dried form of the poblano pepper is also called the ancho chile. Just a little FYI. So I'm going to start off by throwing my peppers into the skillet. And actually I'm going to turn this up to almost to very high. We do want to start this off on a high heat. This really brings, when you cook these and you roast them on a high heat, this really brings out the flavor. Now, you think this doesn't really sound good, but one thing I forgot to mention is not only do we have caramelized onions and the roasted peppers in this dish, but we're also going to add some scrambled eggs. So we're going to have some protein. So this is going to be a filling dish. And on top of the protein, we're also going to add some melted Monterrey Jack cheese. And there's actually a couple different ways, possibly more, that you can serve this. So in addition to making the rajas, I'm also going to make some refried black beans. So what I've done in the past, you can actually take a tolera roll or any type of like French bread. You layer on some refried black beans, and then the rajas with some Monterey Jack cheese. You can serve it like that, or if you have a panini press, you can actually make kind of like a panini, which it's really good that way. But I'm making it a slightly healthier way by making just a regular corn taco with the rajas inside. So another word of caution, when you're cooking these peppers, and this is a high temperature, it actually might release some capsaicin, because there is a trace amount in the peppers. And again, some of the peppers might be spicier than others. So probably not a good idea to have your family in the kitchen unless you're used to this type of thing. But otherwise, they'll come in and they'll be gassed and start coughing. Alright, so I'm going to cook this probably for at least 5 minutes. You don't see that. You didn't see that either. Alright, so I'm just going to let that sit. I want to kind of lightly toast, or blister I should say, the chiles. So there's different ways that you can make this. Some people just add salt. I do like to add a little bit of seasoning. So right here I have some cumin, some ground cumin. And then I have some salt and dried Mexican oregano. I'm just going to let that cook down for a minute. Let me try and get a shot of this so you can see what this looks like. So you want the peppers to kind of have this blistered kind of appearance. It looks, I don't know, let's say it's black, but it's darker, and it looks like the skin's coming off. So you do want, that's what you want to look like. Down to the point where I want to add the onions next. Let's go ahead and throw those in there. Now it's important that you let the peppers cook a little bit longer because they do take a while to soften up. You don't want them to be crunchy when you serve them, so make sure they're nice and tender before you serve them. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and throw in a little bit of salt. And I don't have measurements for salt, but start off with the smallest amount and then work your way up, depending on how much salt you want in your food. You know, some people probably want to keep their sodium levels low. I probably should, but I'm not. Okay, so I'm going to let that cook down for a minute. And I did turn the heat down to about medium. It was on close to high. But I don't want this to cook too fast. Okay, so I'm going to let that cook down. And while that's cooking, I'm going to go ahead and get started on my tortillas and my beans. Okay, so while my peppers and my onions are cooking, I'm going to go ahead and get started on my tortillas. So the process of making home tortillas is relatively simple. It's just that it would be helpful if you have a couple of specific tools, and one of them is a tortilla press. This is a wooden one. There's different varieties. There's some that are metal. This is just one I just happened to buy because this is all they had. I do like it. It's worked very well over the years. The only thing is you have to, sometimes some of these, like the wood ones, you have to put some type of plastic over it so that way the masa doesn't stick to the wood, which is will happen if you don't cover it. So this is what I'm going to use to make my tortillas. So I just have a small glass bowl because I'm only making a few tortillas. I'm not going to make enough for a whole family for a big party. So I'm just going to start off by measuring out 1 cup of masa flour, and it doesn't have to be a level cup because again, everything in cooking, especially Latin cooking, is approximations, cooking by taste, cooking by texture. Alright, and I'm going to add I'm going to start with about a half teaspoon of salt. I know it sounds like a lot, but trust me, it'll taste good. And then I have a cup of water here that I'm just going to add about half of it first. And then using my hands, oh, and probably at this point, it's a good idea, before you start this, it's a good idea to remove any jewelry you have. That way you don't get any of the dough stuck into your jewelry. Okay, so go ahead and add a bit more of the water. Now the important thing is you don't want this dough to be too sticky, because if you have a sticky dough, it's going to stick to the tortilla press, even though I have the plastic on it. So don't add all the water at once. Just add a little bit at a time. So I have about a quarter cup of the water left, but this actually feels, I think, just right at this point. So I'm just going to kind of knead this a little bit, make sure everything's all nice and mixed in. And even, I'm going to taste a little bit, make sure the salt level's good. It's good for me. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and let this sit for a minute, and while this is sitting, I'm going to start cutting my peppers and onions for the refried beans. Now I'm going to cut some onions for the refried beans. Don't need a whole lot because I'm only going to use 1 can of black beans. Now, sometimes you're in a hurry, and I understand a previous video I mentioned that I don't use canned goods very often, but beans is one of the exceptions because you know, I think they're pretty safe to eat. I know some foods like tomatoes you probably don't want to eat too many of because of the chemicals in the can lining can leach into the tomatoes. I think it's called BCA. But yeah, canned beans are relatively safe, and it's a huge time saver because you usually have to soak the beans and cook them. So that's almost like a whole day process if you include the soaking time. So I chopped this is about a quarter cup of onions, and then I have 1 whole jalapeno. Now again, you can de-seed this or just chop it up and throw it in as is if you want some the spicier bean. But I'm going to go ahead and de-seed this. Okay, and then I'm going to mince this into small pieces. And I probably should have started the beans first because these are going to take a while to cook. And I apologize, I'm kind of cutting this a little sideways. The onions are already killing me, so I might chop my finger off because I'm cutting with one eye. Okay, that's good enough. I don't mind a little chunk of jalapenos in my beans. So my onions and my jalapenos, and right now I have a small saucepan on the stove, and it's preheating on medium heat. I am going to put a little bit of avocado oil in it, and I'm going to saute both the onions and the jalapenos, and I'm going to add some some garlic and some cumin for some additional flavor. All right, so I have my small saucepan on the stove, and I'm going to add maybe about 3 tablespoons of oil, avocado oil, to the pan. And I'm going to throw in my quarter cup of onions. And my jalapenos, de-seeded of course. And I'm going to go ahead and saute this until the onions are translucent and just starting to caramelize. We don't want them like dark brown, but if they're a light brown, that's good. We do want them soft. Okay, so I'm going to let that cook down for a little bit, and then once that's cooked down, I'm going to then add some garlic, some salt, just a little bit of salt, and some cumin. One thing I do want to call out is you just want to be cautious when using salt. especially with canned beans, because canned beans do contain a lot of salt. So you probably don't really need to add that much when you're making refried beans, when you're using canned beans. Alright, so it looks like our onions are just about caramelized. They're definitely translucent. So at this point, I'm going to throw in some garlic, and I have about 2 small cloves in here. Using my garlic press, and so I'm going to use my knife and just scrape this off into the onions and jalapenos. And then I'm going to go ahead and put in maybe a 1/4 teaspoon of cumin. And then I'm going to throw in 1 cup of black beans. You can use pinto beans as well. I just happen to like black beans a little bit more than pinto beans. And if you're using canned beans, this is just my preference, but I'll typically will drain the water out of the can, and then I'll add a little bit more and swish it around. I'll do that a couple times just to kind of rinse the beans. So once I have my beans in here, I'm just going to stir them a little bit. And I would not add any salt at this point. I would just go ahead and just let everything cook down. After you mash the beans, then go ahead and add a little bit of salt after tasting it to see to check the salt level. Okay, so I'm just going to let this cook for just a little bit, and you probably will want to add just a little bit of water. Sometimes when you get canned beans, they're not cooked enough to the point where you can mash them up to make refried beans. So you do want to let them cook for just a little bit. And so I'll probably put in about maybe 1/4 cup of water to start off with, and see how that looks. And you can probably see this black skillet right here. This is what I'm going to use to cook the tortillas. Now traditionally in Mexico you would use what's called a comal, which would be basically like a skillet or like a clay cooking surface that's cooked over a fire. But that's pretty old school. Most people just use their stove now. But I did turn this on a little bit ago because it does take a while to heat up, and I have it on about medium high. So I'm not sure what your stove looks like, but mine's about a 5 right now. So I'm going to start off there and see how that works as far as heat. I'm actually turned up to 6 because you want to have a higher temperature. Alright, and let's go ahead and check on our rajas while we're over here. Okay, so our rajas have been cooking on low heat for the last 10 minutes or so, and they're looking pretty good. One thing I do want to mention, you might see little things like this. This is actually the skin from the peppers that's coming off. I really don't mind this, but I know sometimes people, they don't want the skins on, so you can actually roast these in your oven first on broil. You just have to keep an eye on them. Once they start to turn kind of a dark color and the skin's peeling off, you just want to rinse them in cold water, and you can just peel the skins right off. And then you can do this part where you cook them in the skillet. Again, I skip that step because I really don't mind the skins, but they can be a little chewy sometimes. So I'm going to add about a pinch of ground cumin and a generous pinch of salt. Give that a stir. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you can cook this with eggs, with scrambled eggs. So I cracked 6 eggs into a bowl, add a little bit of milk so the eggs are a little fluffier. I like fluffy eggs. I did not add any salt to the eggs since I'm adding salt here in the pan. Alright, so I'm going to turn this back on medium heat, and I'm going to go ahead and pour my eggs into the pan. And I'm going to let that cook until the eggs are done. Okay, I almost forgot this part. This is actually, I forgot to put some garlic in here. So I'm going to throw in 1 large clove of garlic. Thankfully the eggs haven't cooked yet. And let me give that a stir. The garlic just helps give it a nice flavor. Normally you'd want to put the garlic in after the peppers and onions are cooked. Many of you are probably aware, but garlic does not taste good if it's overcooked. It kind of gets bitter. So that's why I put it at the very end, right before I put the eggs in with the pepper mixture. So, but yeah, so put the garlic in once the onions and the peppers are cooked. Let the garlic cook just for like a minute or so, and then go ahead and throw the eggs in and let that cook down. Alright, the beans have been cooking for about 5 minutes or so, maybe less. I'm going to go ahead and throw in some water. I have half a cup of hot water in here. So I'll add that to the saucepan. Get this a stir. And I'm just going to leave this on medium heat and let this simmer for a little bit. My eggs are still cooking. And the rajas, you'll probably want to give them a little bit of a stir. Just like making scrambled eggs, you don't want them to burn to the bottom of the pan. So maybe after a few minutes, give the rajas and the eggs a stir. The beans, we'll just let those simmer for a little bit because we do want those beans to cook down so they're nice and soft before we mash them. And my comal feels like it's almost ready, so then we can go ahead and get started on our tortillas. Alright, so we have our masa dough that's been sitting for a little bit. I like to let it sit because sometimes when you add some water, it takes a little bit for the flour to kind of absorb the water. So you want to let it sit before adding any more water or adding more flour, just so you can kind of gauge the texture of the dough. So you should be able to roll it into about maybe a little smaller than a golf ball size. And then when you press down on it, you might have some breaks, which is okay. If you push down and there's really no breaks at all, you might have a little bit too much water in there. But this one looks like it's pretty good. So I'm just gonna take a few of these, roll them into balls, and then I'm gonna grab my tortilla press. So again, I put plastic on this so the masa dough does not stick to the wood. And I'll just place my ball in the middle of the tortilla press, press this down, and then depending on what type you have, you're gonna have to press the lever. And the more pressure you put down, the thinner your tortilla is going to be. My daughter loves helping with this part, bless her heart, but sometimes her tortillas are a little too thick for my taste. And it should peel off just like so. So that is your tortilla that's ready to go onto the comal or a cast iron skillet. Alright, so my rajas are done, all the eggs are cooked. So now the last part of this is I'm going to take some Monterey Jack cheese, and I'm lazy. You can either, if you have the whole block cheese, you can grate it yourself. You can either, if you have the whole block cheese, you can grate it yourself. I didn't have any of the gradient on hand or the block, but I did have the slices, so I'm just going to go ahead and throw some slices on here. Like so. Once you have your cheese on top of the eggs, then you're going to go ahead and turn the heat on low as it'll go, and then just cover it with the lid and just let that sit. And in the meantime, we can finish on the beans, which, as you can see, are coming along nicely. And we can finish our tortillas. Alright, so I've made about 5 tortillas on the tortilla press. As you can see, our beans are almost done. I'm probably just going to add just a little bit more water because we don't want these to cook down and burn to the bottom of the pan. So I want to make sure these beans are nice and mushy. It comes time to smash them. Okay, so the beans keep cooking, and then I'm gonna go ahead and throw in my first tortilla on the skillet, slap it on there, and wait for the magic to happen. Now some of you may have tortilla warmers for whatever reason, but what I like to do, keep it simple. I'll show you my tortilla warmer. So all I do is fold this in half and then wrap it around the edges so the tortillas stay warm and they steam a little bit, which makes them soft. Sometimes when you take tortillas off the skillet right away, they might feel a little hard. That's okay. Once you put them in some aluminum foil and wrap them up, they'll steam a little bit and they'll soften up. So they're kind of like similar to what you're used to for the store-bought tortillas. So once you see the steam start to come off the tortilla, you might want to give it a quick flip and let the other side cook. I actually prefer to have a little bit of brown on my tortillas. This one, you can't really see it, there's just a little tiny bit, but I do want some more. So I'm gonna let this one cook a little bit longer on the first side. So about a minute and a half on each side before you turn it over. It really depends on also the heat that you have your skillet turned on. So again, mine's about medium temperature, a little higher than medium. Okay, so I do have some brown on the edges, so that's good. So after I flip this tortilla over, I'm gonna let it cook for about 1 more minute. I just wanna make sure that there's no darker spots where the dough is still kind of wet, it hasn't cooked all the way through. And sometimes when you're cooking tortillas, it might start to bubble up a little bit. That's fine. If you don't want it to bubble up, you can just take your spatula and just kind of smash it down a little bit. Alright, so I'm just going to turn this over, and this one is done. So I can take this tortilla, put it in my tortilla warmer, and then I'll fold the edges. And I create like a little package, and I put my tortilla inside here. And I just kind of open it, and then throw in the other tortillas as I make them, and leave the tortillas inside the aluminum foil until I'm ready to serve them. So let's go ahead and throw this next one on. Oops, this one kind of fell apart. I promise I did not take a bite out of the tortilla. Alright, so the beans have boiled down to the point where the water, it's not really runny, it's kind of thick, a little viscous-like. And I hate to do this on camera, but I'm going to use a metal potato masher in a non-stick pan. Probably not the best idea, but it works. And I'm eventually going to get rid of these pans anyway because I'm not too crazy about them. And as you can see, I have 3 tortillas cooking simultaneously on the iron skillet. So while those are cooking, I'm going to go ahead and mash my beans. I did turn the heat down on low while I'm doing this. I do want them to stay warm, but I don't want them to, you know, cook to the point where they stick to the pan. So I'm just gonna go ahead and mash these. And as you can see, I'm not really having to put a lot of effort into mashing them because I let them cook for so long that they just basically fall apart, which is exactly what I want. So just kind of go around in circles. Kind of mash up every little bit as much as possible. It's okay if you have some chunks in there, it doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, the purpose of this is making something simple, right? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and give this a stir. Make sure I got all the... Right, that looks really good. So at this point, you want to taste it. See if it needs any additional salt. I did sneak a taste off camera. It is actually perfect, so I'm just gonna leave it as is. And in the meantime, I'm gonna go back over here. I'm gonna flip these tortillas over. Oops. And see this nice brown spot right there? That's what I like. Okay, so once the tortillas are done cooking, I'm going to go ahead and get a plate out and show you how I plate this particular dish. Okay, so everything is done. My tortillas are all cooked. I ended up with about 10 tortillas in my the batch that I made, which again was only 1 cup of flour, 3/4 a cup of water, and half a teaspoon of salt. So very simple. Alright, so I'm going to take some of my tortillas and see how soft and pliable they are. Alright, so I'm going to take some of my beans first. And just go ahead and slap these on there. Like so. And then take some of my rajas mixture. Too. Now, there's cheese on this already, but you do have the option, if you want to, you can just crumble some more cotija on top. If you don't want to use Monterey Jack, because cotija is actually has a lower fat content, so if you're trying to reduce your fat intake, you can just omit the Monterey Jack and just use some cotija cheese instead. And I'm going to try and throw some avocado on here. And some tomatoes from my garden. You like cilantro. I know some people don't like it, but I love cilantro. So I'll throw some cilantro on there. And voila! That's our rajas with homemade tortillas and refried black beans. Enjoy! Hey guys, thanks for watching. Now, I'm going to continue to focus on breakfast dishes probably for the next week or so, but if there's anything that I've ever made and posted on Facebook that you thought looked interesting or delicious, feel free to send me a private message or just add a comment in the comment section, and I'll see what I can do to provide hopefully a recipe and a video. So thanks again for watching, have a great day, and keep it simple.